Seagull's latest video, State of Overwatch. This is more so for him. Not so much of, hey, look at Seagull's arguments. This is why I think they're wrong. No, no, no. This is for Seagull to watch, so he could further understand not only the state of Overwatch, but further understand where he may be as far as his own mental state. Um, so let me just not go on to a tangent here, and let me just start this video. But so I'm just going to take a look at all of his arguments. Don't worry about what's on the notepad. That's for me. And we could discuss why he made certain points and why some of them may not be completely thought through. So let's just get started. His first thing that he says that I kind of want to mention was, he says,
am I the only one who finds Overwatch to be really frustrating these days?
So first off, you could just he gave his main agenda, or rather focus, which is that he's really frustrated with Overwatch these days. And he does talk about how prior to he wasn't so frustrated, and how he used to really, really love the game. But there's an emphasis on the frustration being only recent, or rather somewhat recent. So then if we move on to the next big point.
I have played this game for thousands upon thousands of hours, but there is just one very consistent trend in my Overwatch experience. Good games are really good, and bad games are really bad.
So the thing with that, good games are really good, bad games are really bad. I agree that is something that needs to be condensed almost. But it's tricky though, because the way not only Overwatch but any game works, if one party or one individual is having a lot of fun, now unless it's a complete stomp, usually if you're kind of beating up the other team, you're kind of absorbing their fun, right? And you're experiencing that fun yourself because you're really winning these games, right? And then it's same thing true for the opponents. If they're getting kind of beaten around and stomped a little, it's going to be really unfun for them. But the other team's probably having a bit of fun. Of course, in the extreme case where it is a complete roll and a complete stomp with like no chance, it can be boring. And then if you take the moderate case where the games are really, really close, the reason why those games tend to be like those prime games of really fun games is because you go through moments of having fun and you go through moments of not having fun, where like one push you all rolled and it feels super good that you rolled in that one push, and then the next push you're struggling, and you go into overtime, but then you beat them on that last push, and then you get to move on to the next point, and then this whole up and down of rolling and getting rolled and rolling and getting rolled. If it happens in one game, it's perceived to be a really good close game and really, really fun. But those kinds of cases don't happen often, whether in Overwatch, leagues, Dota, any you name it, right? And so, I don't want to go on too much tangents. I want this to be a kind of quick video for Seagull. So.
And I think this is the fundamental issue behind Overwatch currently.
He addresses it as a fundamental issue.
We need to figure out a way to normalize the experience a little bit more, so that way when I click on the Overwatch rank button, I don't have to have a coin flip on whether or not I'm going to have fun.
Now, this coin flip phenomena, it has been addressed by several of the YouTube community, YouTubers, content creators. One, I'm not sure if it was Jane, but mentions how it's kind of like a third of your games, the whole third thing, where a third of your games, your team's going to likely lose a third of the games. Your team's going to likely, win, perform well. And then the other third of the games are more so in your control. It's more so what you can bring to the table and how you influence that third. I think that's a very simplified view of the game. It's somewhat accurate, not entirely true, though. Think about it this way. If it is kind of like a coin flip, then individually, one could perceive a bad streak of coin flips and think that the game is really bad, right? An individual can experience, and this has happened to me, a sequence where there's just levers, toxic players, all these things that are really out of your control, and it's no more than an unlucky streak. I definitely had that happen to me recently. And so the same thing could be said the opposite manner, and does happen, where you have lucky streaks. You have really good teammates, and you have a big sequence of that. You have a huge spike in SR, and then you kind of drop a little because you don't have that good streak of players. And of course, ideally, you would want the coin flip to be a very 50-50, but go do trials of coin flips yourself. Do trials of 10. Not all of those trials are going to be perfect 50-50s. Most of them will be, hence that's how stats work, but you might have some occasional outliers, occasional trials where it's very one-sided, and that could definitely happen. So the coin flip issue is more with an issue with team games. And I remember seeing a video with Surefour and Seagull discussing this with Jane, and they addressed that. So I'm not going to go further into that. That video is definitely out there. I want to just address Seagull's opinions and arguments. So let's move on to the next one.
Because personally, I'm kind of exhausted about it. I'm a little bit burned out. And I think there's a few design points of Overwatch that make me feel this way, and I kind of want to talk about those. The first issue I want to talk about is the issue of hard counters at Overwatch.
So then he addresses hard counters, and he explains how he's burnt out because of certain design issues, and he brings up hard counters. And then he goes on to make the example of Tracer and Break, and how he says, quote unquote, you gotta swap or you lose, right? Mirror or you lose. He thinks there's too many hard counters in this game. So right off the bat, he is pushing the ideology that that hard counters do in fact exist. So he's completely sold that hard counters do exist. And then that is very important to establish, because he sets that point up for the rest of his arguments. So like for the meantime, my concern is, how does he know that is the case with Overwatch? And he tries to explain it later in his video, but we're going to talk about why that analysis may not be... It might be a little fogged. It might be a little cloudy. So let's move on.
Just go back a couple years, right? Reinhardt versus McCree. The McCree wants to flashbang the Reinhardt, right? So he wants to throw the flashbang over the shield, and maybe the Rein predicts that, right? And so the Reinhardt can tilt their shield up to block.
And that is a really good example. And he goes on to give more examples of good counterplay. And that is true. If there's room for counterplay, it makes the game really interesting, because there's windows of opportunity to, well, counterplay. And he goes on to give examples of bad counterplay. One example he gives is when Doofus presses Q, what do you do as Ana? Now, I don't play Street Fighter games at all. I haven't played it since I was young at the arcades, but somewhat recently I tuned into the Street Fighter Kumite, and I just wanted to see how that esports scene was, and just kind of take a look at the status of it. And looking at that game through my new competitive eyes that I developed in Overwatch, I noticed something, that the nuance of that game, of fighter games, heavily involves animation canceling, and windows of opportunity within certain attack animations. And that's something I think Overwatch does definitely lack. And much like the Surefour Seagull debate, I don't want to talk about solutions so much, because that's definitely what they did. Even though they said they didn't want to, they did it for like a good rest of the debate after the first 10 minutes. But if you did want to provide a solution there, I think your solutions is providing animation windows of opportunity that would allow counterplay. So if Doomfist versus Q, maybe adding a very small, almost negligible, but nevertheless small window of opportunity where maybe you could stun him out of it, sleep him out of it, do damage to him as he's queuing up, or even do the same of him coming down, right? And now it is really fast, and I know before it used to be slower, and so they sped it up because it was hard to land your Doomfist ult. But and I do agree, Doomfist is definitely one of the harder ones to balance, and they are currently trying to balance them in different ways. So, what my point being is there are solutions, and it's not so much that it's this hero counters Ana, but it's more so like it's more so within the game design, which I guess he does kind of point out, but I think his focus on it is a little misguided. So let's move on to the next one.
I guess my main concern with Overwatch is, when did we go from this depth and this nuance in the gameplay, right? Where we have the system of, they do this and I can do this. And we went from that to almost like a rock, paper, scissors. Like I have a spreadsheet open of the counters. I pick this there.
Okay, yeah. And then so he's wondering, when did the meta shift? When did it go from everything being about actually I think he makes that point later, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but he talks about how it's kind of a rock paper scissors meta, and how you could have a spreadsheet, and this is really important. He says, I pick this, therefore I win. He's asserting the notion, and he does this multiple times throughout the rest of this video, where their hard counters, one, do in fact exist, and because of that, if you pick against a hard counter, or rather, if you get hard countered, you are automatically going to lose. He gives the example of how a 3500 Brig can beat even the highest SR of Tracers, and if you don't switch, you throw regardless of your performance. Regardless of your performance. Now, to my understanding, someone with good performance means that they are extracting great amounts of value, whether it's to their team or even individually, and with that value, of course, that's how you win games, right? You maximize your value, you minimize your risks, etc., etc. But to him, regardless of your performance, you're throwing. So he's developing the perception that no matter what, you have already lost the game. That is a very prime recipe for tilt. That is exactly the path of tilt. And when he made this point, that's what made me realize that he's not finalizing and saying this is the state of Overwatch, and he might have mistitled this, but this is just his current understanding of the game. And I hope that he will further develop it, but let's get back to the video. Let's see here. And he also makes the example that when Brig didn't exist, Tracer was a strong meta. Same thing could be said actually for multiple heroes, even Mercy, but let's go on a little further. Let me just try to tie this in all together.
And so I would like to compare that scenario to what I consider the best interaction in Overwatch, which is Pharah versus Hitscan. Like, let's say there's a Pharah on the other team. You have so many options, right? You got like what? Soldier, McCree, Ana, Zen, if the Zen can hit their shots, Diva, Widowmaker, soon to be Ashe. There's many counters to the Pharah, right? But it's not.
And then he says, and then he further addresses how it's not really a hard counter with that scenario, because as Pharah, you could choose different positioning, routes, etc. And this is a big contradiction to what he was saying earlier about Tracer versus Brig, because the same could be said about Tracer versus Brig. But why is it not the same for Pharah against hitscans? And of course, lower SR Pharahs do get countered by hitscan because they don't understand Pharah that well, and rather they don't understand positioning that well and how to change how you play. They don't understand the nuances in play style. And I feel like he's making the same mistake when it comes to the current status of Overwatch. He's failing to see the nuances in play style that currently exists, because he's so focused on how the game used to be. So there, I feel like that is as if he's kind of tunneling and picking and choosing what defines hard counters. And I would love for him to define what hard counter means. Because if you could arrive at a definition, then we could probably establish what exactly it is. So that was really, really interesting that I thought he made.
Like,
Oops,
just by
wrong one. So let me move on a little further.
me. And when you start implementing these hard counters, and
Actually, hold on. Oh, and he says that is the heart of Overwatch, right? And heart and soul Overwatch is those nuance in counterplay. That's not That's not just compositional. And so here he makes another argument that these hard counters promotes that rock paper scissors meta.
into the game, it removes that nuance, and it really degenerates the game into.
And I don't think it removes the nuance. It just adds another layer to the nuance, and he's stuck on that layer. Now he's explaining the more of the latter experience, right? Like I want to make that clear, that he is talking about the latter experience, and is talking about how it is very different from pro play. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's a later argument. So again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to make sure I'm trying to address his arguments properly and at the right time. So I actually just wanted to point that out, that he is making this argument, and it's going to be important for later on. So let's move on.
And this video is about, well, let's go one step further beyond just the gameplay, right? So why is this bad for a typical ladder experience? Well, let's put it this way. If my teammate picks a hero that I think is hard countered by one on the other team, suddenly I feel powerless. I feel that we're going to lose no matter what we do, because we're at a severe disadvantage even before we even get to play the game. I'm no longer looking at the gameplay. I'm just looking at what heroes my team are picking and choosing. Like, let's say.
So that is a really, really important. If my teammates picks a hero that I think are hard countered by someone on the other team, suddenly I feel powerless. That is true no matter what. No matter what team game you play, you are always going to be powerless about what your teammates do. And that is ultimately a problem for team games and not so much a problem of Overwatch. He also feels like he's going to lose no matter what, because no matter what we do, because we are at a severe disadvantage even before we get to play the game. He's already assuming the game is lost again. That is a prime factor for tilt. If you are already assuming you're going to lose a game before the game starts, you're likely not going to perform your best. You're likely going to be focused on what your team's doing. You're likely going to be focused on the problem. And as I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned on this stream, but I used to be a coach for for quite a while, and I still kind of am, just not as intensely. And I always used to tell my team, during a game, if you address a problem without a solution, you're gonna be frustrated because you're dwelling on the problem. Now, the best thing to do is, instead of addressing the problem, provide a solution to the problem. And that helps now whether that solution is correct or not, that helps your team think about a solution and how to execute it, rather than think about the problem and tilt up because of it. So that he's already setting himself up for a bad time. I'm just looking at what our heroes, my team, are picking and choosing. And he makes an example that if we have a tracer and they have a rig, I'll stare at the tracer and say, let's swap or we are going to lose. Again, assuming that no matter what the tracer does, you lost already. And he talks about how it promotes toxicity because it makes you feel powerless and frustrated. And like I said before, that is a result of just team games. So let's move on to the next one.
In the current meta, we're talking about deathball meta, right? Triple tank, triple support, otherwise known as GOATs. Let's say the other team goes triple tank, triple support. You don't mirror, you don't have a Somber Doomfist. GG, it's over. Because it's just how the meta is right now for solo queue. And, well, obviously it's not every game, but I would say the vast, vast majority of the time you will lose. But
so the thing important about that, so I had this discussion with a friend before about what really dictates a meta and how the community perceives meta. Now, the meta ultimately is dictated by, well, hold on, let me backtrack a little. The guidelines and rules and boundaries of a meta are dictated by patches, by numbers, by what is possible in the game and what is not possible. Now, within those boundaries, within that realm, the community perceives whatever it is they perceive, and that's a whole nother discussion for another day about how the community perceives meta. But whatever way the community does perceive the meta, they'll play it as such. Now, throughout time, the community will probably change their opinions on the meta due to either experience of playing that meta, due to either content creators that explain certain things that could probably accelerate the evolution of the community's perception. But overall, the community's perception on meta is always constantly changing, and so is the meta, and it's not really often that it's not really often that the community optimizes their perception of the meta. I hope you can follow along, but I want to explain this simpler. So it's not often that the community has it completely right of how the meta is actually optimally played. It's not very often that happens. It does happen every now and again. I may be wrong about this, but I think the last time they had it down right was during like season 5, 6, during dive meta, right? Everyone knew dive was the strongest thing. It eventually trickled down to the lower ladders. Eventually everyone understood, okay, dive's the way to go. But when the community finally caught up to the optimization of the meta, Brig was introduced, right? To change everything up again. And especially now, and especially the way Blizzard's taking things, the meta is evolving rather quickly. So the chances of the community having the right perception now, or even a day or a week from now, isn't so likely. It's going to take some time, and the more Blizzard changes it, the longer it's going to take, or rather, the more difficult it will be for the community to catch up, unless there's good content out there that's providing great analysis, and then you might see opportunity for the community to understand this. So let's move on a little further. Actually, let's keep going with this.
Having a severe disadvantage on hero select, that's not a fun or deep gameplay to me. That's just frustrating. And it's exacerbated by another aspect of the game, which is no stats. Let's say one of my teammates picks one of those hard counter heroes, right? And I don't know if they're performing well or not, but I know typically they wouldn't. And it's not like I have access to a scoreboard to see if they are performing well.
But I know typically they wouldn't. Now, that's super important. I know typically they wouldn't. I don't know if they are doing well, but typically they don't. Now, the reason for that perception could be for a multitude of factors. I'm willing to bet that he has that perception because people probably don't play their roles that well. And if they don't, that's maybe not an issue with, the counter picks, and more so with the issues with the individual, right? Like maybe they don't know how to play against that counter in the same way that bad Pharahs can't really play against hit scans, right? Again, there's that big contradiction.
Of course, even they could be even performing well, and I'm probably going to blame them if we start losing, right? How many times does this happen in Overwatch where someone picks a slightly off meta hero and they get blamed for it even though they're performing well?
It happens so often, and I've seen so many Torbs, Mays, Sims in the past. Majority of them feed because they see the few that hard carry. And it's much like I've used to tell my old teams, the community doesn't hate one-tricks necessarily. They hate bad one-tricks. They hate one-tricks that don't know how to play against their counters. I've seen one-tricks that knows exactly how to play against their counters and absolutely carry me and the rest of my team through their games. Now, do we still hate one-tricks? No. I mean, you might hate them for making you mad in the first place, but that may be more on you than it is on him or her. So, something to really think about there. Now, let's move on to his next point. Now, I'm going to really wrap this up because I really don't want this video to be that long, so.
And this frustration that I find isn't just in the hard counters and the interaction between the heroes themselves, but also in the design of the heroes. I mean, just look at it this way, guys. There's been
So then he makes, I'm just, trying to roll this through. He makes the argument that 6 heroes were added in the past few years and they weren't really traditional FPS heroes. They have a lot of CC, but that's not really the main issue. And he thinks that the main issue is to rely on your teammates. And this gives an example of, he gives examples of interactions where you need your teammates, like if Doomfist is flanking, if Sombra hacks you, etc., etc., and he doesn't like the team element because it makes one feel frustrated. That's interesting because I personally have been playing since around season 3, 4, and really started getting interested in season 5. And at the beginning, I remember majority of the player base, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we wanted a team game. I felt as if many people were playing Overwatch because it was like an FPS shooter MOBA that was team based, and that's really fun. So, and when dive meta came through for solo queue, it harmed a lot of players who wanted team oriented environment, and it rewarded players that were individually skilled. And that is super important to note because a lot of the players that left were those team-oriented players, it seemed. And it seems like a lot of the players who stayed were more those individually skilled players. And now that the meta is shifting back into a more team-oriented meta, some people are adapting to it and some people aren't. It's so true for any game. Anytime there's a meta shift, it's going to shake up the part of the community that doesn't want to change. Those few, they may have really loud voices, but, they're just either going to have to adapt to the game or they don't play. They quit. So he talks about how the team element makes one feel really frustrated. I would say it's promoting that team element is really good, and it's going to teach players to play as a team. If not, they're going to lose SR. They're going to lose games. They might bicker. They will bicker. They will fight, because that's more of the essence of the team game. But if you give it enough time, people will accept it, and they'll understand that they're not going to gain SR if they don't play with their team. So his frustration sounds to me as if he's not adapting or coping with this new meta well, and he thinks it's a game design error, and I think he's missing the point of where the game is going. I think he's missing the direction of where the game is going. The whole argument of this game is an FPS, this game's a MOBA. No, this game's an FPS MOBA. It's always been that way, and actually will further promote the MOBA aspect. Why? Because put in more impactful variables in this game. Impactful variables meaning like heroes. You're going to see a drift or direction towards a MOBA-esque playstyle. Say, for example, Call of Duty, CSGO, Battlefield, and Rainbow Six, any of those. If the loadouts and the classes and all those little options that you have were kind of impactful, more so than they are now, and rather even just more quantities of them, right? Just many more of those types of variables. Those games are probably gonna start to become more about like what are the best loadouts, what are the best setups, etc., and less about the FPS aspect. Now, it would be bad for those games because those games cater towards that FPS crowd, and if you enjoy those FPS games, you should be playing those FPS games. But Overwatch isn't like that. Overwatch is a MOBA game executed through an FPS style, right? And that's what seems so fun about Overwatch to me. I used to play Leagues a lot, but I hated that top-down view. I hated that it felt more like a chess game, or rather looked like a chess game. And Overwatch was so attractive to me because it was a MOBA game executed through an FPS, right? Just first person, you see what you see. It felt much more real to what real like war or real like combat would be like. And so that has always been the focus of Overwatch. So for seeing him not address that in that way and not perceive it in that way makes me really understand why he is tilted. So for here and out, I'm just going to like fast forward through the video because I didn't have the other links, and I just want to show you his main
or push
arguments.
out that Doomfist on high ground or this or that, then you feel even more naturally frustrated, right? And I think that's a pretty big issue. And not only that, but let's talk about another issue, right? Which is the current meta for a high level solo queue environment.
So and then he makes the argument that dive for a year and a half was meta. Adding Brig countered the dive, and it was a noob stomper hero. Brig's not fun to play against. It promotes Deathball and a higher SR. Dive relied on high coordination, high skill. Deathball comps is easy. Low skill floor, actually. And thinking of the most fun meta, which fun is kind of relative, but okay, I'll give him that. And that he was trying to think about the most fun meta and it being dive, and how all these changes kind of created a more frustrating environment, much of like what I just addressed. I think Brig is kind of, it's kind of annoying to play against, and I think the solution lies within animation windows like Street Fighter games, but I'm not trying to talk about that right now. So he does have a somewhat true perception here. I just think it's a little skewed. And as far as some compositions being like different skill ceilings and skill floors, hey, we have the same thing for heroes, right? Mercy's a low skill floor with a low skill floor, low skill ceiling. And so like that, it just exists on a more macro level now, right? Which is actually really awesome. Like, to be honest, you no longer have dive that's prominent, and that if you don't have those higher skills, you won't have that higher coordination. And because you don't have that higher coordination, you're going to lose. We don't have that anymore. Now, if your team doesn't have the best coordination for dive, hey, you can run Goat's Death Ball, and that could likely, beat out other dives. Now, if the other team is also running Death Ball, then it comes down to who could coordinate those Death Balls a little better. Again, the nuance is still there. It's just another layer, right? So I found that really interesting that he's so tunneled on how things used to be. I feel like he's not adapting well. So let's move this on a little further. 1358.
And this one's probably a bit more personal to me. I don't know if many people will also share this opinion, but I figure, hey, I'm ranting, I may as well go for it. I think ultimates in Overwatch are too powerful.
So Show Forward slightly agreed with him on this. I slightly agree with him on this. He makes the claim that either my team has ult advantage or the enemy does, and if that's the case, snowballing becomes really rampant. And he gives an example of snowballs. However, he makes an example that if you... And actually, I should probably show you this
across
part.
The board.
So he talks about how different examples of how snowballing can be bad. But he makes one example that I thought was really interesting.
Very, very powerful. A lot of the time they are I win combos, right? What's a Nano Blade versus a team without support ults? That's a one team fight. What's a Graviton versus a team with no support ults? That's another one team fight. What's a Winston ult versus a team that doesn't hit a sleep dart or some form of CC or have a support ult? That's probably a one team fight.
Doesn't have a form of CC or ultimate. So he's mentioning how ults are too powerful. But if you don't have CC and you don't have ults, then they are really powerful. Well, I thought, and I used to think that he was making the argument that's, again, it's a little contradictory, and I'm sure he recognizes this point where it is kind of contradicting the statement that crowd control is bad or a little bad. And I think he says that wasn't the main issue. Rather, I know he says that wasn't the main issue. So again, this isn't a whole like, oh, got you, Seagull, but me just trying to help him understand his own arguments. So if crowd control helps minimize or reduces the impact of ultimates, do we need more or less of those? And again, I do agree that ults are really powerful in this game. Me as a support player, I kind of don't like how much I have to spend tracking ults. I wish I could just worry more about the position of the team and more so how we're moving. So again, I probably really agree with him on this point. But I don't think this is his main concern. I think this is something that also is just bugging him and that he just wants to mention. And because I agree, like, snowballing is not really fun to play against. That's why I stopped playing leagues, because I didn't like the whole snowballing effect on top of it being like a 40-minute game. And so I completely agree. This is something that does need to be addressed. And so I'll give him that. Let me see here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Snake ladder, relative economy, are gambles. Yeah, well, ladder is very gambly. 1 in 4 teammates in Overwatch, you are at a disadvantage before a fight starts, and that experience is true prevalent. Again, kind of agree. Now, as far as an experience being prevalent, that is up to the perception. Now, if the experience is very prevalent, people might perceive that differently, but ultimately, the majority of the community is going to perceive it as prevalent. Ooh, excuse me, kind of burp there. So, for him, it might be even more so prevalent because he is probably in this tilted, cloudy state of mind. And when I say tilted, tilted could come in various, qualities. It could be like a slight tilt. It could be a hard tilt. I think for him, it's like a slight tilt, but tilt nonetheless. So move on to the next major point, which was around
advantage before the fight even starts. And that feeling you get of powerlessness is just too prevalent in Overwatch, in my mind. I think there needs to be a little bit more focus on the nuance of Overwatch, because that is where I consider the heart and soul of Overwatch to be.
Okay, and then again, he thinks there's too much back and forth bash between heroes. Oh wait, actually, I'm just gonna
It's back and forth action between heroes, coming up with strategies and plans, and then acting around them. And when ultimates are too powerful, it reduces it to, I have more Qs. If hero counters are too strong, then it comes down to rock, paper, scissors. And some of the hero designs are just like, I'm here, therefore I win unless one of your teammates does something. And all of these factors.
I'm here, therefore I win. Now, not to take it too literal, but come on. A silver player trying to do their best as Brig isn't going to counter a higher SR player. Yeah, maybe a 3500 Brig player can counter a higher SR player, but that's kind of the point. Like, there is still that room for counterplay. There's still that room to skill gap. Yes, I do think Brig is on that slightly OP end. But they are addressing it pretty okay, and I also think that the solutions could also lie elsewhere. So yeah,
just add powerlessness, frustration, and when people feel like that in a solo queue environment, they're toxic towards each other. And I think that
again, that is more of a team thing. So then for the rest of the video, he kind of talks about how he doesn't have fun in Overwatch as much as he used to. That maybe there's issues that aren't fixable, and maybe the new feeling covered it up. Meaning that, like, when he first started playing, that he might have not noticed it because of the new feeling that Overwatch had, to which is probably likely true. He's mentioned how he was in a bubble and how he's now kind of solo queuing a lot more, and how that could be a thing. And I really do think it is, but he does say that he thinks the game is fixable. I agree, just not in the way he said. He talks about how the Overwatch community is small, and how the content, YouTube content, Twitch content community is also small for Overwatch, which I agree, and I am currently starting up a Twitch/YouTube, so follow me at Cup of Ice, twitch.tv/Cup of Ice. Good plugin, right? But he talks about how right now the community is kind of more like Reddit driven, esports drama driven for like YouTube. It's kind of true. So I personally hope to provide content like this, where we more so talk about perceptions, more philosophical, I guess you would say, more philosophy of Overwatch, and that is going to be my huge focus with my new Twitch and YouTube. I am currently a player for a team called Dallas Flight Club. I used to coach for about a year and a half, 2 years. I stopped that to take a break of coaching, focus more on this. I will be uploading coaching content, but I do want my focus of my channel and my YouTube to be more about the philosophy of Overwatch, whether it's discussion through metas, whether it's actually the meta itself, whether it's more theory crafting, just general philosophy of meta and science of Overwatch, science and philosophy of Overwatch. So that's kind of it for my video. Seagull, I hope that you take a break from Overwatch, look at it with a fresh lens, and then repost a video about what you really, really think of it after taking a break, because I feel as if you you may suffer from something a lot of players do, which is just that general long-term tilt. Um, so please review what we discussed. The reason why I think it's important for content creators like yourself um, to be sure they are in the right state of mind is because videos like this, like the state of Overwatch, is detrimental to the community. Seagull, you're a huge staple to us. We appreciate everything you've done, but things like this can be really harmful for the community long term. The community could buy into this, and I'm afraid that you might be promoting tilting ideologies to the rest of your community. So please address it, and you don't have to address my video. You could just address it in a whole different video, apart from what I've said. So just please think that over. All right. So thanks a lot.